There were many times that I was fully convinced that I was going to die while I was in my active addiction.
I was a passenger in my own body for 36 years. Now I'm like awake.
I'm not run by fear anymore. I can breathe.
But until we have these successful people in their lives through recovery come out and talk about it, we will continue to have a societal stigma against addicts.
Welcome to the Nameless Recovery Show, where we talk about addiction, mental health, and normalizing recovery. I'm your host, Estil Wallace. We're rolling right into another episode of the Nameless Recovery Show. With me is a very special guest. My lovely guest today is Denise Beagley.
Hello.
Spelled Beagley.
Correct.
Denise works for Arizona State University. Specifically, she works for ASU Center for Applied Behavioral Health Policy.
And I'm also work for the School of Social Work now as well.
Excellent.
We're kind of under the School of Social
Great. You have like
Work,
six
but
more
I have.
jobs.
I do. And then I work part-time as a crisis intervention specialist for the City of Chandler Fire Department.
So, first of all, thank you for making time to come up here and hang out with us and be on the show, and let me mic you up and ask you a bunch of questions. For those of you that are just tuning in, I want to kind of talk from a high level what Denise does and why she's so critical here in Arizona and to mental health and to addiction recovery. There was a lot of talk last year in 2020 around, we should send social workers out on 911 calls, this sort of thing, when they were talking about defunding the police and maybe first responders aren't well equipped to help some of the people out there in crisis. Well, the fact is, for many, many years, in Arizona, there is an effort to train a large percentage of first responders in exactly that, in crisis intervention. That is a big part of what Denise does.
Absolutely.
Denise trains first responders on crisis intervention and crisis support.
And also mental health and
mental
all the
health.
things that go along with that.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about it? What do you train first responders on? What do you teach them?
Well, since 2004, I believe, I've been teaching CIT, it's crisis intervention teams. That's actually, that came to fruition, I think it was in 1988, is when the Memphis model was created in Tennessee after an officer shot an individual that had a serious mental illness when their family had called 911 for help. And so from that, they decided they needed to address, police needed to be trained on mental health and all things kind of under that umbrella. So substance use, the difference between substance, what that might present like versus mental health, and also the legalities, kind of all the how we can basically have someone lose their civil rights up to 72 hours to get treatment, right? So someone could witness behaviors. Sometimes, we're our own worst enemy, right? That if we may not seek help, but we really need someone else to kind of help us, get us to a place where they could triage us and see what services we might need as humans. So we do that. We're able to train people. So I've been teaching that since 2004. I teach a specific understanding psychiatric disorders and also a simulation on what it's like to hear have a psychotic episode and hear voices. So I have MP3 players. It's the work of Dr. Patricia Deegan. She started the National Empowerment Center, and she herself is a voice hearer. And so I modify and alter that for the police. And then I also, in 2016, partnered up with Chandler Fire. I was already working for them since 2015. And we wrote for a grant with Vitalist Health Foundation, and we started the crisis support training. So that's specifically for firefighters. And with that training, we kind of modified, because firefighters were attending the CIT, but the CIT was more, it was 40 hours, and it was going into not only the mental health and substance use, but it was also going into like the legal, ramifications. And so firefighters didn't need that portion of it. And so we modified it. And we also did a needs assessment, and we asked the firefighters, what kind of calls are you comfortable on? So they were really comfortable on helping someone who might be intoxicated, but they had a little bit more difficulty kind of navigating if the person was under a certain substance or if it was a psychiatric condition. And
Hearing voices, for example.
yeah, exactly. So having them have that experience, like I hear even years later now, they'll say to me, I still remember having that experience with you, having the headset on, and I'm better at my job. I'm more empathetic because I can ask people, are you hearing voices? What do the voices say? They're no longer afraid to ask, and that's what's great.
So then, for the benefit of those watching or listening, can you explain what do you call that, first of all?
Auditory hallucinations, or you mean the class that
The
I actually
training,
teach?
yeah, what do you call
So
the
it's
training?
hearing voices that are distressing is
Okay.
the name that Dr. Patricia Deegan gave it, and I use that
And then
title.
I've watched it, so I know what it is. But
Yeah.
can you explain it to people that are watching or listening?
So there's basically a track that is a loop track on an MP3 player. That's the easiest way. It started out, I think they were cassettes, and then
Sure.
went to like discs.
Sure.
So it's had an evolution. I've been teaching it since 2002, and then I've placed it onto an MP3 player, and I loop the track. So it has 2 males and 1 female, and these are what the voices that they hear. These are the things that they hear. And
And what sort of things do they say?
so some are like, you're the chosen one. And so can you imagine going around and thinking, I'm the chosen one? But that can be detrimental too,
Absolutely.
as well as things on the other side, which is you're a piece of shit, you smell like shit, you're an ass, wipe that smile off your face. And so sometimes those sync up when we run them through this simulation. So it's a workshop, and I have different stations, and each part of their brain is engaged. So they'll have the voice, they're hearing the voices, they've got the MP3 player on, and I'm doing a mini mental status exam with them. So I'm asking them questions like, starting with 100, take down to 7. Now some people are great with math, that's no problem. Others literally will go down and then they'll go back up, and they'll give me they're like, I can't do it. I've had a psychiatrist take it. He's like, I've been doing this for 30 years. This ought to be easy. And so I said, what's today's date? And he's like, Phoenix, Arizona. And I said, interesting. And he goes, what are you writing? And I'm like, paranoia. And he started really having like this, reaction to me writing these things. And he actually, at the end of the class, he got teary-eyed and he said, I wish I would have had this 30 years ago. Yeah. He's like, for so long I was like, get over it kind of mentality, And I think that's another thing, like people get to a point sometimes when we're helping others, that compassion fatigue, or
I'm glad you used that term.
Yes, we just get to a point, or that burnout, whatever it is, right? Because there's difference. And there's this protective factor too, right? Is particularly when you're doing this type of work and you're always giving to others, you have to have a life outside of that. But this is one of the areas, I think, for the firefighters, the police officers, that's impactful. They always come back to me and they're like, that was awesome. Because I tell them when they're in it, I said, my hope for you is that, like, here, if you started here on this, assessing your level of empathy, I feel like it's a continuum. And so if you're starting here, I want you to be over here, more empathetic, more understanding, and more comfortable to have these conversations with people. And, as you know, we can take a drug and that can induce, right, a psychotic episode. Mm-hmm. So knowing the difference, having that discussion, it's still similar, in fact, for that person. They're still having that voice, but if they're independent off the drug, is it no longer there for them? So I think that's the big point. But in the moment, when you're responding, how can I talk to the person about it?
And to go back up to high level, what this is an effort to prepare first responders to be able to handle the very common calls that they go on, mm-hmm. and, for lack of a better way to say this, to prevent what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis. We're trying to not have that happen. We're trying to take people that are dealing with substances, people that are really less of a criminal threat, although they overlap a bit, but less of a criminal threat and more of a we've got more of a behavioral thing going on and trying to address it properly. I think one of the other big benefits also is the strain on cities, city budgets. We look at how much we spend on some of these folks that go to the emergency departments over and over again. The fire trucks come out over and over again.
That was another reason, like, for us to address it. So our city had identified, like, I believe 872 individuals that use the 911 system frequently. And
frequent flyers.
We want people to use the system if they need it, right?
Sure.
But it can be taxing. And if we could teach them, these 872 at that time, it was like maybe testing their blood sugar. It was, maybe they were having an episode and they just needed some support, or they were lonely. So, like, teaching people about the services that we have in the community. So, these firefighters and police officers are now programming the crisis line, the warm line, into phones of patients.
Right.
So they have another line of support. And I tell people, there's always somebody that wants to talk to you. There's always somebody. And so if we provide these 24-hour, 365 days a year numbers, that will hopefully help and save somebody's life someday.
Yeah.
And also teaching them to take care of themselves. This is an investment in you. So, that's how I originally started with the fire department. It was teaching the community paramedics on motivational interviewing and using those skills to help encourage folks to take better care of themselves.
Can you explain for our listeners, what is motivational interviewing?
It's a way of working with someone's ambivalence. A person might be feeling two ways about something. So, and looking at motivating them to change a behavior that they're telling you they want. It's not what you want for them. It could sync up that way.
Sure.
But more often than not, the person might say, I wish my life was different. I just don't know what. And they may not have insight into it. So we look at stages of change. That's the kissing cousins. It's complementary to MI, motivational interviewing. But it's looking at that trans-theoretical model of, like, I might be in denial or pre-contemplation. I might be in contemplation, that's where ambivalence lives. I'm thinking two ways about something, and how do I get into action? How do I start making changes for myself? So we use that as a way to complement, to help. Where do I start? Because me, as a helper, I'm in action. You're in action. Right. But there probably was a time in your life, as all of us, where you were thinking, this wasn't really a big deal. Other people have this problem with me, but I don't. And so it's getting people to see that and change a behavior.
And I would venture to say, as a recovered addict myself, I would venture to say that in the very earliest stages of action, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Sure.
I'm not sure.
There's no game
entirely
plan.
sure I trust the things that are laid out in front of me. Help might look like a phone number somebody gave me. Or somebody said that they would be a sponsor, or somebody gave me an address and said I should go to a meeting. So yeah, there's a lot of gray area, and I don't.
Yeah. Everybody's got their own plan, and you might have had someone say something to you. It's almost like planting seeds. Like, someone might have said something to you, and then maybe I can cultivate that as a therapist and say, if you were to look back at your life, and think about what other things did people say to you that maybe you're starting to think, maybe I do need to make a change. And you're all of a sudden, like, this light bulb goes off for you, and you're like, that's not the first time I heard this, or this isn't the. And so that's what all of us are helping somebody, right, in some form or fashion. It's like when that person's ready to make that change. And so that's what's great about motivational interviewing. I'm asking, the basics are ORs, right? So we ask open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, summaries. We also, the spirit of motivational interviewing is called PACE, that partnership. I'm accepting you where you're at. I'm not judging you. It's a collaborative. You're the expert on you, and I'm the expert on me, and we're going to work together. They added C for compassion, because they said some people weren't acting with compassion, and you need that. That's the genuineness. That's the communication and connection. And then evocation, asking questions. If I just ask you close-ended questions constantly, it's not it's like a yes, no, like, do you really, you could just fill out a form. But if I say to you, tell me what you want out of your life. What's something that you know, what are your hopes and dreams? My favorite is, like, what are the 3 main reasons why you want to make a change? Because that's the heart. That's where stuff lives for people.
I want to sleep inside. I want to see my kids.
Yep. I
and
want to
don't
be a
wanna go
good
back to
dad.
prison.
You know, yeah, all those things. That gets me excited, because once I start seeing that, it's almost like you can see that light bulb above, and they want to believe in themselves, and they want you to believe in them too. And I think that's, you know, I can use this on scene. It can be in brief interventions. It can be in long-term, you know, longer sessions with people up to 30. It's not for forever, because I believe in 3 communication styles. You've got the following style, which is Carl Rogers, right? Just, I'm going to listen to you. You got bad news. I'm going to be there. You know, unconditional positive regard. There's the directing style, which I think is more like Dr. Phil. Is that lifestyle working for you? You know, he's like intense, and it works for some, right?
Sure.
About 15% of the population does really well with
like
tell
the
me what
hammer.
to do, right? Yeah, and they may or may not go along with it, but initially, and that's more of like, I need to. You're doing unsafe things, and I need to direct you to safety. So if you're actively cutting, you're taking pills, you're drinking to excess, I'm going to say, I need you to stop those things right now so I can help you, right? And then there's the guiding style, and the guiding style is motivational interviewing. So it is really working with that person's ambivalence, helping them enhance that motivation to make change in their life. And it rooted off of, you know, Dr. William Miller created that in 1983 as a way to help people with their drinking. And it's kind of had this evolution. I've morphed it a little bit myself, you know. I think we all do. Like, we take things on, and it is not to be manualized. You're not going to go through ORS or PACE in a you know, exactly. But those mnemonics help us remember, so we can help people. Am I keeping pace with Estil right now? Do I have the spirit of motivational interviewing? Even if you're not perfect with it, it's not about being perfect. It's about, am I in the moment with you? Am I genuine? You know, I can't be a robot and do this work. I have to be real, and everybody's different.
People in what we find in treatment is people early on, not all of them, maybe a third or so, they get cold feet 2-3 days in. As sobriety starts to kick in and more distance is put between them and substances, my coping mechanism, now I'm very uncomfortable. And as I become more vulnerable, I'm more uncomfortable. And now I'm maybe thinking I overreacted, I maybe should leave. And we use motivational interviewing to just remind them, ground them. Why did you come in here? You've already done the part that most people never do, which is get in here.
Yeah.
Why did you get in here? Remind me, what was it you were going to get sober for? You can walk out the front door. This isn't a lockdown facility.
That's the hardest part, I think, is I also on teaching clinicians and folks that do this work is, I get them to a certain point, and then it's keeping them like engaged. And I think it's just that. It's reminding of, you have those skills, just click back to them and talk to people about it, you know? So I think that's one of the biggest things is how do we help someone stay engaged, stay on their path, and encourage them. Where really it's not cheerleading. It's really coaching. How can I coach you? How can I remind you? And I think that fits in really well with what you guys do.
Reminding, I think that's a great way to say it.
Yeah, it's like, hey, you told me this. Is this still your goal? Is this still what you want? And that's what gets me excited, is when you start to see people, and also when they come back to you and try to give you the gift of their sobriety or whatever their change is. And I say, you earned this. This is your journey. And that's where the affirmations really come in. You've made changes in your life, and you're successful. And sometimes we try to sabotage ourselves, right? Because we're having this success. I don't deserve it. All the feelings that start, why were we using this coping mechanism in the first place? Well, they click back to, I'm starting to have feelings that I have been pushing down.
Well,
what do I do with them?
Self-deprecation and negative self-talk is an old smelly shoe that fits really well. And breaking out of the cycle of that is very, very tricky.
Yeah.
I've got my own experience with
I'm sure.
self-talk, and it was tricky getting out of it. I'm glad you touched on it.
We all do. I mean, I haven't gone through the journey of, recovery, but we've all recovered from something, specifically with drugs or alcohol, but we've all recovered from something. I think that's part of it, and we all have negative self-talk. So I just did a keynote about, practicing positivity. It's really easy for us to have, we have 50,000 thoughts a day, I think it's what's reported, and a lot of those can go negative. So how do we stick positive? So for every negative thought, we have to have 6 positive to change, our psyche, to help us be healthy mentally. This can be a really bad neighborhood if we let it go there. And so how can we help people? And so back to the first responders, this was something for them, like teaching them about motivational interviewing, teaching them about, they obviously there's varying degrees in understanding. That's why we did a needs assessment. But it was kind of our 4-hour awareness class, our CST, Crisis Support Training T1, Tier 1 class, was about an equalizer training. We're going to bring everybody in the room. We're going to talk about trauma-informed care approach and response. We're going to talk about the paradigm shift within the culture of the first responder, because they're not just putting out fires, and they're not just, they're running calls on mental health. They're doing all sorts of different stuff.
How many, not the number of calls, but what percentage of calls do you think first responders, particularly firefighters, are running that aren't fires?
Okay, so the statistics say that about 10% are fires.
So 90% of what they go on is not a fire.
It's either EMS or behavioral health.
EMS.
So EMS is emergency medical. So even, let's say...
In Arizona, that's drownings.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, all of that. Thankfully, those are down. Car accidents. We have overdoses, whether they're accidental or intentional. So suicide attempts or not accidental. We run on a myriad of different, even difficulty breathing. So difficulty breathing kicks out. Obviously, they hook someone up with their 12 leads, right, and check their heart, make sure everything's going okay. Everything checks out fine. So then they start to say, we're teaching them what happened before we got here today. So sometimes it's a panic attack. Sometimes it's somebody, I just had a broke up relationship, which was something, something happened that triggered them to have this panic attack. And it feels like a legit heart attack.
Yeah, I've had a couple.
And so we're, again, teaching, if they don't, basically they can do 2 things. They could transport the individual to a hospital, or they can leave the person on scene. And what we're also looking at is, if they don't have a crisis unit like we do in our city, then, can they make a referral? Can they program the crisis line number in this person's phone? Because that makes a big difference to somebody to know that there's alternatives. Or, can they call a crisis unit out, even the Maricopa County crisis unit out, to help follow up with this person? So, because usually there's more to unpack there. Yeah.
We call crisis occasionally to do a suicide assessment, on-site suicide assessment. If we get somebody that uses language that shows intention and means.
Yeah, and I mean, I could, one can argue even accidental overdoses. Like, I always think, was it a suicide attempt?
Right. When it's hard to tell, they're not going to really tell us. And it's the 3rd leading cause of death in America. 3rd,
yeah,
behind cancer and heart attacks, heart disease. And if you're under 50, it's the leading cause of death.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, the numbers are rising with COVID and everything that's happened.
God.
Even if you feel like you're handling your stress, they also say, like, children handle stress differently or pick up stress from their parents.
Absolutely.
Their living environment. Even if you're trying to keep it together, having those conversations with your children as well. So there's, it's a ripple effect. And so those are things that I think the firefighters, they already come with a higher education as far as medical, right? And to become a firefighter or a police officer, there's intense training.
Right.
And what's really cool, and then they have medic school as well. They go through medic school. But it was really neat to see the response. And we've trained over 6,000 first responders in our
So awesome.
our state, and we did take a couple hundred of those are in different states. So kind of neat. We went up to Seattle, Washington, and we presented at the CIT International. We also took it to Kansas City at that CIT International. So we also got it adopted into State Fire
That's
School.
fantastic, because Kansas City has a bad reputation for being the birthplace of the Kansas City policing model.
Yeah, so it's how do we, I think there is openness. I think, I think police, I think it's hard to get someone to be a police officer these days.
Especially now.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things, and there was just an officer killed in New Mexico over the weekend, and it's scary. But we also, if like going back to your original thing, is if we can teach somebody, like, okay, there's no threat here as far as like tactical threat,
Right.
but hey, I could really easily escalate this situation or de-escalate it. So I teach those MI skills. Like if I say to you, hey, tell me what's been going on, how did we get here today, is going to be far better than yelling at you and telling you, stop it, do this, don't do that, why aren't you looking at me, get your hands out of your, and giving too many commands to somebody who is obviously under the influence of something.
I could be high as fuck
Yeah.
on fentanyl.
Yeah.
And I could be just driving away from losing my job, or breaking up with my girlfriend, or having my children ripped out of my life, or who knows.
That's the biggest thing, and we don't. I mean, I don't talk about officer safety. They do that. They
Right.
have a whole tactical.
Sure.
I'm talking about when you feel like you can engage in verbal de-escalation,
Right.
is where I come in and try to help use those skills for folks.
Yeah. How do we work with the general public
Yeah.
so that we have safer outcomes?
Yeah.
And part of it is safety where nobody's getting harmed, but it's also how do we get this person to the right support?
Yeah, that's
in some cases not just about nobody getting harmed in a police intervention. It's also about like, well,
getting them to the right door.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that 911 doesn't get called again, so that they don't find themselves impaired driving again, so that they don't find themselves in these situations over and over again. Because maybe all they need is to be asked a few right questions and end up, like you said, at the right door.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. So that was another thing we actually identified when we were doing these trainings. So we took over their emergency medical system, the EMS system training, like their quarterly training. So we were able to go in first quarter and we had, I think it was 27 trainings we did. It was almost like we were a show at Vegas. And we just, where we would do like a morning and an afternoon, and we got through the entire membership at our city and invited other cities to witness it. And it worked out really well. And then from there, we did additional training where I had you come in and give them.
I was honored by
Yeah,
that.
no, it was amazing. And do a 16-hour. We did a kind of a test market of 8 hours or 16 hours, like 8-minute abs, 7-minute abs, But they actually, surprisingly,
7 dwarfs.
they wanted more training. They wanted the 16 hours because 1 hour of you talking wasn't enough. They wanted 2 hours, so you could bring in someone who was a peer to talk about their journey, and you could talk about your program. And it was twofold. It's not only are you able to work better with patients, but are you able to see more of inside yourself or the people you work with? Because I don't know if you know the statistics, but it's more likely for a first responder to die by their own hands than in the line of duty.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So one of the other key pieces in what we've kind of revamped our programs is the peer support program for first responders. And we're saving lives. People reach out. People say, I need help, or my child or my spouse.
And I don't know that the average person really is able to fathom or has given a thought to what kind of trauma a first responder is exposed to in the course of their career.
I can tell you just personally, so I've been doing this job. I'm going into my 6th year paid. I did a year volunteer first. But so when I first had to run a call by myself and had an individual who had passed away, because we go and assist on those natural causes, but kind of ticked the boxes. I was raised Catholic. and just kind of, the family was very Catholic, and just had a moment, and I was kind of like, oh my goodness, I'm here during this family's worst day, and I've got to keep it together, versus fast forward now, and I'm in a situation where it's my job to be there. And am I experiencing compassion fatigue? Am I thinking this is self-preservation because I can't get emotional when you need me to be solid?
Including when first responders run calls and children have been harmed or killed.
Exactly. Those are the hardest ones. For if you ask any first responder, they're going to say peds calls are the worst. And a lot of folks also have children that same age, so it magnifies. So we keep it together. We push it down. It's called, cumulative career traumatic stress. There's actually a word for it, but we don't really talk about it because
cumulative career
traumatic stress. So I run a call. Let's say my first call is an overdose. Then I clear that scene. I get called out for a domestic, violence.
Same day.
Then another one, maybe I have a code and the person passes away and I have to help the family with that. It doesn't matter the age of the person. A loss is a loss. That grief is there. Then I'm hoping to get lunch maybe at some point, but I don't get lunch because I get called out to assist PD with a check for welfare, or I have to do a death notification with a police officer. And I don't unpack those things. And I don't, I just keep trying to do my job.
If somebody gives me the finger on the freeway, I want to unpack it with someone.
Right. Or you're at Costco and you're wearing flip-flops and someone rolls over your toe and you lose it and you're thinking, or I haven't slept in 48 hours, right. All of those things add up. And so over a person's career, and I do this part-time, but I thought about that. I thought it has changed me a little bit. It takes each death takes a little bit from you, each call, depending on the call. We've had barricaded situations where people have, I think a person, I want you to love me, so I'm going to keep you with me. And if, we make it out of here, great. If not, and so working with those individuals and helping people, and then the trauma of that person getting released and they have been held by someone who once loved them, and the trauma of that. So there are all these things that we do, but it takes a toll, right? It's the adrenaline dump that occurs when there's like this thing in our rooms, like we have the LED readout, and there's like a click that occurs when you're sleeping that the tones are going to come. It's like this wiring thing, I don't know, but it's like a pre-click, and I'm already up. Yep. And then I tone out, and you get like this adrenaline dump because you've gone from sleeping to I need to respond. And I'm only code 2. I'm not code 3 with lights and sirens. I'm ambers. I don't even get to put the ambers on, only if I'm in the middle of the road. But it still puts something in you. And now I've got, whether it's 1 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I have to respond to you. And how do I do that in a way where I'm going to be helpful and useful to you or your family or whatnot. So those things, that takes a toll. We have, more for firefighters and police officers. They die earlier, like the stress of their career on their body. There's more individuals that turn to alcohol as a coping, or drugs as coping skills. And it is a coping skill, but it's not a healthy one. So we're trying to teach police, fire, other first responders to have a life outside of their job. Right. They have to have an identity.
Number one coping skill for firefighters is weight training, right?
Right, but it's always, you got to do the whole body and the mind. And so yoga, at first, we were bringing yoga and different alternative type, exercises. And at first it was kind of like, this is weird, but now I go to the stations and I see them doing yoga on their own. They'll rad. Throw a video on, or not a video, but just find a channel that's playing it, or a YouTube, and they're doing yoga, and it's like awesome. Or that's breathing. Really cool. If you're not driving, we're even teaching police officers emotional intelligence. How can you be more responsive and more in tune when you're on a call, being aware of your breathing as you're driving to that call. Looking at the whole situation, being, situational awareness, being aware of your emotions.
Mindfulness.
Yeah, mindfulness. All of those things make a difference to, everybody on scene, even the people that they're helping.
Absolutely.
So if I can talk to you in a way where I'm calming and say, hey, I really want to help you, but I can't help you if you're yelling at me. What's going on? I really want to hear your story. And that genuineness comes through, which if you're using those skills of MI, that's kind of there as the foundation. People are going to go, well, wait a minute, this guy wants, or this woman wants to hear from me. And so that's kind of part of it. It's having a real conversation.
Right.
And there's so many good officers, so many good firefighters out there.
Absolutely.
I think it's the people that get on, like, TV. Can you imagine wearing a body cam all day? What would people say? Right? Like, it's a lot of pressure. And so I even joke with the firefighters. I'm like, can you imagine if you had to wear a body cam all day? It would be tough. I mean, or for me, what if people read my emails and then scrutinized my, grasp of the English language? Did I use everything perfect punctuation? I mean, that's a tough scrutiny.
Well, and that's why the work you're doing is so important, because it does give our first responders, both firefighters and police, more tools. And I see why it's so difficult for police officers when their lives are in danger.
Yeah.
They're on high alert. Police officers get shot and killed.
Hypervigilance.
Hypervigilant.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this gives more tools. If they can get to a place where they don't necessarily feel like their safety is in danger, where they could then try to de-escalate as opposed to escalate. Maybe get this person to some support services so they don't recycle back through the system again.
Yeah.
Again and again and again.
And
it may not work, but it might work. You never know.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of. I mean, I love the fact that they protect us. I mean, we all work as a team, and you guys are on that team too, because it's getting the person to the right place. It's getting the help. It's how you all engage with them as well. Because sometimes we hear, I don't want to go to this place because they're not nice to me, or I've been there and it doesn't work, or they don't seem to care about people. But then, the people I've referred to your program and they're excited, like, I feel like something has been done for them, and they're living a life of value and they're excited about life again. That's to ignite that in somebody. But it starts from us too, like as first responders on scene. How can I get the person to the right place? So this was the thing that we identified in training. Well, if I just take them to the physical hospital, it's like being in an airplane waiting to land. Yeah. You're sitting there for hours in an ER.
That's the worst.
It's not the place you need to be. Why don't I start my journey in a place where I can get the help I need, right? Like, and I need to go to the right person. I'm not going to go to my dentist to work on my brakes. I need to go to the right door. And so that's one of the things that we kind of look at is how can we, identify what's really going on. And I tell people, be honest with the people that are trying to help you. I know, sometimes we feel like we got to kind of protect ourselves or not tell the truth. You deserve the best care, and I want you to get it. But you got to tell people what's really going on.
And ultimately, that's what I think that's at the center of the ideal, is that we have a community that functions, that trusts its first responders, and the first responders know how to deal with some of the tough cases within our community. And that's what we're working for. We're working for a better, safer world to live in.
Absolutely. I mean, we're really lucky. I think our city, our police and fire communicate really well. I think there are other cities that do as well. And I think that's, like Arizona in general, we have a great crisis unit system in place, and others try to emulate us. And we can always do better, I think where we need to, we need more facilities to help people, and to see that it's the shame and stigma that exists with mental illness and substance. Like substance use, people villainize those that use substances.
Absolutely.
And there's trauma when there's rooted trauma from someone who uses. there's something that wasn't going right in their world, and they kind of go back and they say, why am I using? They're not just like, it's Tuesday, I'm going to start smoking meth.
No.
You know?
And as a community, passing the buck and kicking the can just doesn't fucking cut it. I mean,
Yeah.
the truth is we're losing 500 American lives a day to
Yeah.
drugs and alcohol. And regardless of whose fault that is, it's still happening.
Right.
And how can we possibly move the needle? I'm disgusted at the sheer numbers of death from drugs and alcohol. You look at numbers from the CDC, and in the many years they've been tracking this data, the numbers have gone up only. They've never plateaued, and they've never gone down. It's only getting worse. And then
Yeah.
isolation made it all the worse. I'm not really a conspiracy theorist, so I'm not of the opinion that that any, or at least not most, of the people who made calls on isolation, stay-at-home orders. I don't think anybody. I would rather grant the benefit of the doubt and say that people were trying to make calls that were in the best interest of public health. The trouble is, anything that had to do with isolation or stay-at-home orders was focusing on this COVID thing and really turned its back on other public health crises like mental health, suicide,
Well, and also
prevention,
physical health.
substance
Yeah,
use,
yeah.
domestic violence. These are all things that all of a sudden we shifted our attention away, and those things just went rampant.
Yeah, unfortunately, we had people that didn't seek medical attention because of the fear of getting COVID, but they
Yes.
actually, some perished from other,
Yes.
medical things that could have been avoided. So it was I mean, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody.
No,
I'm just
no,
saying
no.
we were in uncharted territory, right? Like, we had no idea, and the impact of that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think you're on the right track. Rather than placing blame,
Yeah.
I think by giving some analysis to what we did last year,
Let's learn from
as
it.
as a country,
Yeah.
as a state, as a city, as a municipality, if we can look at what we did, what worked, what didn't work, I think we'll be able to make better decisions when crises like this happen in the future.
Yeah, and just going forward in general, like, I think there's been some good and bad things, obviously.
I heard you can text 911 now.
Yes,
for
and
domestic
they're
stuff.
also looking. We'll see. So the bad thing that happened was, I believe the DCS, Department of Child Safety, had a reduction of 90% of call, where they were reports.
Oh,
they had
God.
that
That turns my stomach.
That's not a good thing, because
No.
a lot of the kids, like, going to school, those reports, not all of them are founded, but you just think about, it puts an eye on something, like a lens for them to
There's a
investigate.
90% decrease in
Reporting.
reporting for child safety.
Yeah, in our state.
That's horrible.
Now, I don't know, that was reported at the end of the year, last year, so I don't know now. if-
Right, another unintended consequence
Yeah.
of stay-at-home orders
Yeah.
that I think we didn't think it through.
No, and
I'll be part of that. Like, we as a society, we didn't think
Yeah.
all this through. And I'm not a policymaker, obviously.
Yeah, but that's where policies do need to change. We need to also, like, one of the things we discovered with CST was, how can we, if firefighters are on scene with someone who doesn't meet criteria for medical hospital, they need to go to detox, they need to go to psychiatric, hospital. And there isn't, and luckily in our city, we have the ability to transport, we're a crisis unit within the city. But how can we get somebody to the right door? And so that's something actually state legislature needs to change, because there's a difference in an ambulance being able to transport and costs and things like that. And I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I do know that there's some changes that need to happen so we can get people to the right place. Because again, I think what happens, and maybe you've been there yourself, is you go to the physical hospital, you wait in chairs, then they're like, okay, now you've sobered up, now we want to take you to a psych facility or a treatment center. And you're like, yeah, no thanks. I've
Well,
already been waiting
and-
here for how long?
And anybody who's listening may or may not know this, but hospitals aren't geared up for behavioral health. Some have what they call like a VMU, like a visual monitoring unit, which is sort of a catch-all for things that are behavioral, psychiatric. But by and large, if you land in an emergency department from a fentanyl overdose, they're beyond giving you some Narcan. they're not equipped to treat you.
And they're monitoring your vitals and things like
They wanna
that.
make sure
But
you're not going to die. And
Yeah,
they care,
and then-
and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
With any luck, you'll sit with the case manager, but that's assuming you sit there long enough. Yeah, it's really not. It's not designed.
It's not meant to
for-
be, but
no.
I mean, I've said this for years. I would love it if we had like kind of a one-stop shop place where under one roof, like especially those that have what we call the co-occurring disorder, right? So I have mental health, plus I have substance use, and medical. So could I triage through this system? But we really don't have. I mean, hospitals try to do that
Sure.
as best they can, but you're still referring to the experts at the end of the day.
And they've got enough to do with medical.
Yeah.
I mean, behavioral becomes this other piece, and like I said, there's visual monitoring units
Yeah.
on a lot of the hospital, a lot of these hospital campuses, where they will attempt to kind of corral everybody and then figure out where they're going to go.
Yeah, I use this as an example a lot. If I am intoxicated on 20 pints of Guinness,
Because you're Irish.
I'm seeing leprechauns drop down from the ceiling in parachutes, and they're trying to attack me, and I have a gash in my head. What are you going to help me with first? So paramedics right
I
away.
need to get you to church.
Yeah, gash in my head, right? Which is great.
Back to mass.
Medically cleared. Then what? Then I say that. Now what? What do you help me with next? Time's going to make me more sober, but will my visual hallucinations go away? Or how you got to help me with both kind of simultaneously. And then see maybe, these programs that I know have run in our state where they try to get someone independent off of a drug for 90 days, right? Clear. Is it still organically there for them, or, is something else going on? Does it go away after they sober up, or is it there?
And that's a tricky wire to balance on.
Oh, yeah.
Getting someone off of a substance or substances long enough to make a clear SMI diagnosis is really, really tricky. For example, since we're talking about it, meth-induced psychosis. You've been up 3 or 4 days seeing some little tiny people, some shadow people.
Maybe you got some, you're picking at your skin because you feel you have
microchips in there.
Yep.
Or something
or bugs or something. Yep.
Yeah,
those are all common psychiatrically and drug induced.
Yes, and yes,
So it's like a decoder ring you need. Like,
Right.
what was it? Is it the chicken or the egg?
Yeah, meth psychosis looks a lot like schizophrenia or schizoaffective. It really does, and that isn't the whole riddle either. Sometimes you have guys in their late 20s that are schizophrenic, who are also doing meth.
Yeah, and that being having that diagnosis of schizophrenia too is also, or another one, bipolar disorder. One or two. The person says, well, I'm feeling better, or I took medication and I'm good now. And it's almost that false sense of security because they still need, it's just like a diabetic, a person with diabetes would need insulin to regulate their system. Well, sometimes a person needs, medication to help the imbalances in their brain, and their neurotransmitters aren't
And when it goes
communicating.
far enough off kilter,
Yep.
it becomes a crisis.
Exactly. And so I think that's a really big thing for people to kind of consider is we need to get through that shame and stigma. People will live on average about 10 years with symptoms of a mental illness before they get help. Now think about that from like a medical standpoint. Could I live 10 years with cancer? A lot of people would be dead within that time. Could you live 10 years with the symptoms of diabetes, or would it kill you? Because your insulin is off.
I don't know if you watched the show Euphoria.
I haven't.
It's an HBO show. It follows teenagers and teenage angst and all that, but it's pretty grimy, and it centers a lot around substance use. There's a scene where main character is talking with her sponsor, and this sponsor lays out, to most of the world, with drug addicts, we push people away because we don't look at it like cancer, even though it's degenerative, it's deadly, and it's just like cancer. People don't see it that way. They see it as selfish. They see it as, if you don't give a fuck about yourself or anybody else, why should I? And that's as common because it is hard to watch someone go through. And I got to tell you, my dad had Parkinson's disease, and I was part of his life and his, and I was part of his care team in his last year and a half of life. And Parkinson's disease, if you say you have Parkinson's or my dad has Parkinson's, what's the feeling? It's empathy.
Yeah.
Like, holy crap, I'm so sorry that you're going through that. And I got to tell you, going through that in my family, the parallels between Parkinson's disease, its effect on my family, is very similar to the effects that alcoholism had affected my family.
Yeah.
It drew everyone's attention. Half of us weren't working. Half of us weren't fucking sleeping. It tore a hole right in the center of our family, very much the way alcoholism does. Cancer does the same thing. And yet, there's this stigma around, you're doing this.
Yeah, you're making this choice.
You're making this choice, and that's a big part of the effort that you have been doing here in the Valley, is to show people that this is not a choice, it's an illness.
It's a brain disease. You're kind of, for some, they're predisposed to it. Like if you have there's a genetic line there. There also is your environment. Exposure. I mean, some of the stories that I have heard from people that I've helped over the years, one person said, how, I'm really interested in, he was 23. He said, this is his words, where he had been Narcaned 9 times. And I just reframed it, you legally died 9 times.
Right.
And he kind of looked at me and I said, I want to make sure you're here for your daughter, and what do you think you need to do? Like, what is it that you want? He goes, I do want to be here for her. And so we started having this conversation, and he finally teared up, and he was like, I'm ready. Like, he was sitting in the ER. He goes, I'm done. I can't, and I hope, I don't get to see the whole story, I can't track people, but my hope is that he is in recovery, that he is there for his daughter.
And I think that's worth noting.
Yeah. I have hope for people.
Topic.
Yeah.
There are so many people who will come in contact with a police officer or a firefighter where in the moment that first responder may cut this person loose or drop them off somewhere or whatever the case is, and think to themselves, God, I'm probably going to see this fucking guy again. And then they never see them again. And in some of those cases where they're never seen again, in some of those cases, people do find recovery. And of those cases, I mean, the stories are amazing. Yeah,
I mean, even I was a case manager back in the day when I first came to Arizona, and it was like I had helped somebody. I only did case management for 7 months, which I say every week as a case manager is like dog years. It's like 7 weeks because you're just learning so much.
Yeah.
But this person came and found me. I helped her get into an IOP program, and she came back and found me in training 3.5 years later, and she tried to give me her recovery, and as like credit for it, and I said, as honored as I am that you want to give this to me, you did all the work. And she goes, but you believed in me. And I said, I did do that. I did believe in you. And I'm so thank you for coming back. Because we don't get that kind of full closure.
No.
Particularly
I imagine you don't. And yet so many people
it's
in
a gift.
long-term abstinence-based recovery will have been seen by first responders.
Yeah.
Some have been Narcan, some have been pulled out of bathrooms, some of them, you've heard Scott's story, he's been pulled out of bathrooms by first responders. Those stories, as heartbreaking as they are, when you see them full circle, and you see them as a picture of health, it's hard to imagine they were ever in those situations.
Yeah, and I think that was another impactful story. It's like, because imagine you're a firefighter and you've run on somebody time and time again. There is that frustration that, why isn't this person caring enough about themselves to not do this?
If they don't give a fuck, why should I?
But there's this disruption, I think, that occurs with the training that shows them just care a little bit more. I know it's tough, you've run on this person, and get them connected with somebody. Get them connected with someone who can help them. Because if I were to, we give this scenario, like if we're at the mall and we're shopping, and someone before us falls down and collapses, we're not, and they're having a heart attack, we're not doing surgery, we're not surgeons, but we're going to call 911, we're going to get the paramedics there to help them, and they're going to transport and get that person in. And at the hospital, they're probably going to go get a stint or whatever they need, right?
Right.
So we're not doing the whole thing. And I think everybody's got a role to play. And so that's the piece. And I think what happens is people will say, I wish I knew who that paramedic was, or I wish I knew who this person was that helped me. Because it's all in recovery, right? It's going back and kind of thanking those folks who helped you.
Well, and that's our responsibility as human beings. That's good stewardship.
Yeah.
It
Paying
makes
it
you
forward.
it makes you a guardian of the light. It makes you a good fucking person.
Yeah, and I love that. Like, I just hope that even when I teach, right, I hope that even if you're in there and you're like, sometimes I get reviews like, oh, that was a nice review of something, right, which usually is code for nothing new. But I hope I say something that you connect with. So I say to people, you know, whether you know this or I'm going to help you reconnect with this topic, that's what I hope, and that you can pay it forward to somebody else. And that's a good thing, you know, to be able to have people feel like they're making a difference, that they connect. And the biggest thing is for people to know that addiction is there, to not villainize the folks that they're suffering and they need help.
Can you imagine the amount of pain someone would have to be in to take lethal amounts of fentanyl just to not feel the pain? Right, and
yeah.
I don't think
It's
everyone
hard to
is framing
fathom
it that way.
Yeah.
They see someone who's just throwing their life away. They're making a choice to throw their life away to not raise their kids.
Well,
No one in their right mind would choose drugs over their kids. No one would do that. But people see that, and that's what they think.
Like, you're making bad choices, you're a bad person. What I love when you do your talk for my classes is it's sad, but the impact is the plane. And you say if we loaded up 500 people and that plane crashed every day, like, people would pay attention to that.
Right.
But, you know, when people are dying here and there.
I'll show the slide while we're over this while we're talking.
Yeah, because that has great impact. Like, I think people sitting there and go, oh yeah. You know, especially first responders. Like, can you imagine responding to a plane crash every time you worked? Every shift, every 24 hours.
Right now it's 500, so it'd be a 747 and about 75 more people crashing and dying every 24 hours. It's every 3 minutes.
Yeah.
In the time we've sat here, a bunch of people have died.
I know, and it's just heartbreaking. And you look at the impact of someone who dies by suicide. They say for every suicide, 147 lives, it's the ripple effect. I want to know what those stats are for someone who has an addiction, you know, and dies from their addiction. You know, my own dad died of multiple myeloma. It was a horrible cancer. He was diagnosed and died within 18 months. And nobody ever said to him, like, hey, Ron, get over it. You know, why are you looking for empathy or sympathy or whatever, you know? Like, stop having cancer. But we do this to people with addictions, you know, and we call it addiction. It's not addiction. It's we have to get rid of this addict mentality, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, you know, it's not substance abuse anymore. It's shifting to substance use. Right, our language matters, and I still catch myself, you know, because we were programmed with these things. I've heard you say the term addict, right? Mm-hmm. And so, like, what's your language that you used? Have you shifted? Do you still use that?
Yes. So I use the word addict so that I can stay clear about my condition. So having living with addiction is just like living with we've talked about it 5 times today, where you can't process sugar properly.
Oh, diabetes. Yeah,
having diabetes.
Yeah.
So my illness is arrested, and it's managed, and I manage that through a number of different ways of therapy. So I see a therapist. I honestly didn't get into therapy until about 2 years ago, and I've been sober 16 years.
Wow.
But I got sober in the 12-step world. You know, I did that whole thing and learned, and fitness became a part of my life. I learned how to be honest. I learned how to shift the language, the relationship with myself.
That's huge, right? Yeah, right. The positivity and
And out of that, a new lifestyle was born and created. But that requires some upkeep.
Yeah.
That can't just be a movie. That can't be a weekend
maintenance.
boot camp.
Yeah.
It's a lifestyle change.
Yeah.
I live differently. I meditate daily. I like to do yoga. I weight train. I say kind things to myself. I try to be kind and helpful and contribute to the stream of life rather than take from it.
Yeah.
And I'm still pretty involved, very involved in 12-step culture. So those things are how I keep the disease arrested. That would be like somebody monitoring their blood sugar, monitoring their diet. These are ways
for you to stay healthy.
But so the shift is when I think that I'm cured and I don't have addiction anymore, I don't have alcoholism anymore, that's when trouble starts. Because if I don't have the problem, well, then I can have a beer at a game. It's no big deal.
And it's you're now crossing the line in the sand. I use this scenario all the time. Like if you have a sore throat and it's a strep throat and you're given amoxicillin for that or penicillin, and you get 10 days, how many people will kind of take half of that and then save the rest just in case it comes back, because they don't have to take off work, go to the doctor, do all this, right? We self-medicate. Well, how is that any different, right? That sometimes people taking medication, they're I don't think I need this anymore. I'm good. But the brain,
so common.
Yeah, it's a brain disease, and we're getting to a place now where with technology, and I hope this becomes for everybody, is I could do a DNA swab on your cheek and know what medication, what diagnosis, right? How can I better help you? That's the goal, right? Because I think what happens a lot of times with people who have psychiatric illnesses is they will use substances to regulate. If I'm depressed, I'm going to bring something to bring me up. If I'm, alcohol is a depressant, but sometimes people take it because they think it's going to make them better.
Right, and there's so many questions around pharmacology and what type of substances are
it's a chemistry experiment.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of that completely goes out of the window once they start self-medicating with hard drugs.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's like, I tell people I don't know.
How long has it been since you take your medication? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I've been smoking fentanyl every day.
If they tell you that, yeah. Or I only drink 2 bottles of Pinot Grigio a day, and I went out on a call and there was a woman who's basically drinking 2 to 3 bottles of Pinot Grigio every day, and she didn't think it was a problem, and
maybe it's not.
She can't drive anymore. She's not allowed to drive anymore because she's gotten so many DUIs. She's literally sitting in her bed and in waste, right? And thinking, I'm okay, And so getting her to kind of start to think, it's okay to ask for help. We work with Mayo Clinic. And Mayo Clinic will often refer to us patients who are waiting for a liver transplant. I can't tell you how many of them have shown up at our door, looked us dead in the face and said, I don't have a problem with drinking. Yeah.
I haven't had a drink in a week and I feel fine.
I'm good.
And I'm like,
yeah.
Are you fucking for real right now? You're going to die real soon.
Well, and that's what's interesting is the lack of insight we have when something is before us, right? When we're so engulfed in our own addiction, whatever it is. That we can't see through it. And we think that we got it dialed in. And it's also an American thing, maybe, I don't know. But is it okay for us to ask for help? Are we showing a weakness if we say, hey, I can't handle this myself? I've lost friends that, have been so wrapped up, they slowly killed themselves, essentially, and that's what's heartbreaking. How is that any different than a person taking their life in suicide versus a long, drawn-out suicide?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that they're a bad person. These are wonderful people that are loving, that are amazing lights in the world.
And they're not other people, other places. It's here. It's everywhere. It's in every community.
Yeah.
We talk about that obviously when we do these trainings. We talk about demographics. You can't pin them down. You can't tell what drug addicts look like. There are people who still think they could tell you what a drug addict looks like.
Yeah, it doesn't discriminate.
They look like everyone.
Yeah, I tell people throughout the world, there's, you would never know. Some folks, I know my own uncles suffered with addiction. Mm-hmm. They were functioning alcoholics until they weren't. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, is like you just don't know. And the demographics, you could have tons of money. I think where society comes in is, I use this as my example. If I'm wealthy, I'm eccentric. If I have some mental health, right? But if I'm poor, living on the street, I'm
a firefighter
crazy.
or a police officer, I can't be a drug addict. It's
Right,
not,
no.
It's not even possible.
Yeah. And it's we're trying to teach them, it's okay. You've seen some horrific stuff. You're white knuckling through this, and the coping mechanism that used to work for you isn't working anymore. But it's really hard for someone to see that, especially when they're told in society that they're a hero, or like you're this, you're kind of put up on this pedestal, and I can't show weakness and ask for help. Or how could I go to this facility if they don't have a special facility for first responders?
Right. And they're traumatized.
Sure. The stuff, like I said, I call myself a baby first responder. Like I've only been working part-time. Like I've had exposure to stuff, but it's part-time, whereas some of my coworkers have, it's day in and day out, 20 years of service, 25 years, 17. We're really seeing people the early on in their career, like up to new to 5 years, and then it kind of skips the middle, and then like 17 to 25 are presenting for therapy. But that doesn't mean everybody in the middle's got it together. It just hasn't shown, necessarily. And we are seeing the newer folks that are coming into service, we are teaching them about this, so they're more in tune to it, and maybe that's why they're reaching out. I don't know all the theories yet, and there's not enough data. And this is not just in our state, this is what I'm seeing nationally trending. But it's great when people reach out, because there's always a resource. But particularly, we also need to train therapists in cultural competency to work with first responders. I've had several people come up to me and say, so I got to a therapist, and this is what the therapist told me. Oh, you don't like those PEDS calls running on pediatric codes? Then just don't respond to those calls.
That's not a workable solution.
No, not at all. And or get a new line of work. Do you know how hard it is to become a first responder? Like the amount of
I've watched several friends do it. It's very difficult.
It's grueling. It is your life for many years.
It's every bit as difficult as doing anything that's highly credentialed.
Yeah. And
it's
yet
a career path.
Kind of thrown away, right? Like, or you have 12 years in.
That would be like being a doctor and saying, go do
just
something
walk
else.
away from it. Yeah. So we need to teach therapists too how to work with first responders.
100%.
And one of the things I'm trained in critical incident stress management, CISM it's called, and it's ASUPD actually put me through it. And I'm their civilian that responds to if they have a critical incident. And one of the things that program teaches you is you're having a normal response to an abnormal situation. And it really, I think it helps people realize, I saw some really effed up stuff, and I'm having these thoughts, and it could be immediate, or it could be down the road. I'm trauma-informed instructor, trauma-informed care. So you either have little T's or big T's, right? Mm-hmm. Those, you could have 20 little T's or one big T, or whatever combination, and it can have an effect on you.
Yeah.
And so how do we help people through this? How do we help unpack some of that crap for them?
Right, because everyone...
How do you dump out your Home Depot bucket of crap,
Yeah, and this isn't about oversensitivity. I think when we talk about trauma and trauma-informed care and processing trauma, what we're really doing is giving it a name, calling it what it is, and allowing some space to actually process it, because all people experience trauma.
Yeah.
And it's a part of life, and what we need to be able to do if we want to live long and healthy and to good purpose is to be able to move through that trauma, grow beyond it, grow strong beyond it, and live to fight another day, live to help another day, live to raise our kids another day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, there needs to be more kindness, there needs to be more self-kindness. I think, we naturally go and program to, even if someone gave you a compliment, it's hard for us to accept that compliment in our society, right? If someone said, oh, you look nice, so I don't look nice other days, it's like this mentality. And I think we need to be kinder to ourselves so we're kinder to others. I think that's a really big thing. And so that, like, practicing self, positivity, if I'm good to myself, I'm going to be nicer to others.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. I don't have the answers for everything by any means, but I can start with myself. I can start being nicer to myself in hopes that has that ripple effect the positive way.
If there's anybody out there that's listening to this and they're struggling, what would you say?
So much. There's always somebody that cares. There's always somebody that wants to talk to you. There are, even if it's a crisis line, call 911 if you need help. And there's always somebody that wants to help you. And be honest with those that are trying to help you. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, I tell people that's, you seem overwhelmed. You deserve the care. You deserve the help. And I truly believe that. I've lost people to suicide. I've lost people to addiction. I've lost my dad to cancer and other family members. I don't want to lose people. Like, whether I know you or not, we're all connected.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Those are the ones for me. I want to make a difference. I want people to connect.
Well, you are making a difference, and the world is a better place because you're in it and the work you're doing.
Well, I love working with you as well. So we're lucky that we got connected. I think it was meant to be. So we can keep. I think it's the ripple effect. That's really my belief, that we have impact that way. So thank you. Appreciate it.
From the bottom of my heart.
Thank you so much.